talking about.
I thought you were going to welcome me back.
Welcome back. Oh, yeah, okay. So welcome back.
Thank you.
We missed you and a podcast last week.
And we did. We kept our audience waiting.
Sometimes, just build that anticipation, I think, isn't it? Just keep even wanting more.
Always leave the audience wanting more, yeah. But I have to thank you. I was away, I have to confess, skiing that time of year. And you've been skiing a couple of weeks before, haven't you?
I have been, yeah.
And you'd made a fantastic recommendation, which I think our listeners are still reeling at the thought of, because you had, for the first time ever, a Kebab Pizza.
Well, it's probably the first time ever in a restaurant I'd had it. That's probably, yeah.
Okay, you said that was your number one food on top of your number two favourite food?
Maybe, yeah, give it that. The connoisseur's choice, I think.
So I was astonished because I went to France, which, as we all know, is a culinary
gastronomic
pinnacle of the world. And I found in a bar, would you believe it, the option of a kebab-topped pizza. I even sent you a photo of it.
Did you? I didn't get it.
Yeah. Sent you a photo. Well, not of the pizza, of the menu.
Of the menu, that's it, yeah.
And you said, yeah, got to go for it. So I went for it. My first ever Kebab Pizza.
We're missing the trick. I think someone, Domino's, if you're listening.
They are missing. Well, there's no looking back now. Once you've had your first Kebab Pizza.
Kebab Pizza, you're ruined for all other pizzas, effectively. So.
There is one other skiing story, but I have to share for the benefit of Matt, who I know will be listening, because after your anecdotes from skiing in Andorra, you told us about the rise of ski-based cigarette smuggling, taking backpacks full of cigarettes out of the country across the border. And one of our listeners, Matt, said 20 years ago he had exactly the same experience. Although I don't think he was skiing, he was on the bus with his mates, and one of them got busted for a suitcase full of cigarettes coming out of the country. So thanks for that, Matt. Let's say we struck a chord.
I only brought the legal amount of Café Cremes back with me, so...
Is there a limit on those?
No, apparently you're not allowed to give them to the children to bring back. They've got to be... you've got to be over 16 apparently, or whatever.
Anyway, we're back now, back in the sea, and we've got another podcast ready.
Yeah.
So let's get going. Hello, and welcome to this week's SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. I'm Dave Parry, and this is Rich Buckle, both on the same side of the table this week, which gives a bit of a clue that we might have a guest in the room who we'll introduce you to in a moment. So what's the SME Growth Podcast all about? It's our weekly ramblings, apart from last week where we missed one, where we try and cover all sorts of subjects that might be interesting to small and medium-sized companies that are looking to grow and cover all the different challenges that you have. And we've got an absolute corker today because we've got joining us in the studio, Adam Beardmore. Hello, Adam, for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Now, our subject today, as people will have seen as they go down the list of episodes and clicked on this one, is about the trials and tribulations of getting into a new market sector as you strategically try and expand your business. So we're going to get into all that. But before we do all of our podcasts, we try and cover just a little bit of news. So just interesting to see what we've all picked up on recently. And the one that everyone knows I bang on about every time is the fact that tiny changes in the GDP figures whenever they're published trigger that discussion about whether we're about to have a recession or not. And lo and behold, just after we recorded the last podcast, sure enough, we technically fell into a recession with a minus tiny amount or whatever it was. And that means 2 quarters now after the previous quarter revision figures. It means we're now in recession. So I looked up the old Google Trends. We've done that before, haven't we? And sure enough, there's a massive spike on the day. So on the 15th of February, it went on the index from 1 to 100 in a day on who's searching for a recession in the UK. On the 16th, it went down to 20, 17th, 14, and then the day after back to 1 again.
Truly was a short recession.
Really was a short recession. I think it just goes to show everybody, was either expecting it anyway or they're not bothered.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that this time, this much vaunted effect I've talked about where journalists really jump on it and try and talk us into an even worse situation. They've given up on this one. They knew that it was coming. Blame Rishi for a bit or whatever you want to do and get back to doing your business. So hopefully it's not affecting us. You're not seeing any of this recession, are you, Adam? Your business is going almost the other way.
Absolutely. It's certainly been a period of growth the last couple of years for us. So.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So let's talk a bit about your business then. You're the managing director of Dalen Limited, group of companies, a couple of different aspects of that. Tell us a bit about what Dalen does.
Sure. So Dalen's a engineering business. We design and make our own products, primarily from sheet steel. And we've got a long history of designing solutions for different markets. And in more recent times, that has been dominated by products for the education market.
Do you mean schools right the way all through?
Yeah, all the way through to universities. And to be fair, probably universities is the largest market for us. So we produce lecterns, collaborative tables, and all kinds of technical furniture. So
what do you mean by technical furniture?
Yeah, I thought you might ask that. So we produce products where you might integrate AV, audiovisual equipment, IT, in such a way that the cables are contained, it all just works, and it provides a really reliable and consistent solution and outcome.
So it's not just a table or a lectern. There's stuff going on with it. You might have to plug it in.
No, absolutely. That's right. So, we put things like rack cabinets inside them that you might put amplifiers, and you may have a visualizer on a worktop on a lectern, for example, that hooks up to a projector, and all of that is all connected through the furniture in such a way to be reliable and consistent.
Okay, just give listeners a bit of a feel then. How big are we talking? How many employees have we got in the company?
Got just over 90 employees at the moment. 90
employees. And you say you're a manufacturer, so you've got a shop floor operation going on and all that sort of thing. What sort of processes are we talking about?
Yeah, so we're going all the way from sheet steel, punching and lasering, through to folding, welding, powder coating, and then assembling and wiring into a finished product. So we've got all of that under one roof in Birmingham, and very much committed to manufacturing in the UK.
Yeah, that's a real soup to nuts.
We were talking before that your family-run, family-owned business. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Dalen as a company has been going since 1957, and it was originally run by the Broadbridges, which was the original owners of the company. And Clive, my father, started working for the company in 1986 and worked there for many, many years until in 2008 he bought the business. And so to some level or another, Dalen has been a part of my life since I've been a small child. I can remember being off sick in the holiday, or being on holiday and going into work and sitting in my dad's office and drawing and all that kind of thing, through to working in the factory in the summers at university and things like that. So
I wonder if Clive always thought he was going to take over the business. Have you ever had that chat with him?
I don't think so. I think that really came about from sort of the early 2000s onwards. I think before then it wasn't necessarily a factor in his thinking.
So yeah, when you were in the school holidays going in, you didn't really think you were going to be the MD?
No, definitely not.
You definitely answered that question a little bit quickly there.
Well, I think I've gone through, as we all do as when we're young, we go through a few reinventions of ourselves. And I went and did physics at university, not engineering. There's obviously some transferable skills, but it's not exactly the same by any stretch. Came out of university, I wanted to work in IT, and did some qualifications there. But actually, alongside that, I was doing some part-time work at Dalen. And as you get more involved, take on a bit more responsibility, get a bit more engaged, then it kind of snowballs, and you pick up a bit more, it's a bit more rewarding, you pick up a bit more, it's a bit more rewarding, and round.
Are there still people there now working there that remember you coming in short trousers in the school holidays?
Definitely. That's been a challenge.
Okay, but you didn't.
Okay, so why just trying to make that transition almost from kind of school kid to their boss type of...
Absolutely. There are people there that, I've got a fantastic working relationship with, but at the same time, they knew me as a child. So that's a difficult balance. There's one in particular, and he'll know if he listens to this who he is, where I remember chastising him for smoking at the age of about 8, and telling him off at some length about did he not realise what he was doing for his health, and he's never let me forget it. So
you didn't hold back even then, didn't need to be the MD.
No, indeed.
So you talked about the excitement and the challenges of being in a family business, and that you've taken over the MD role now, but your dad's still involved in the business. He's the chairman, I think, isn't he? So he's still quite hands-on as a chairman, executive chairman. How do you find that, taking over the reins, but still with your previous MD around?
Quite challenging. He requires a bit of encouragement sometimes to hand things off.
Oh, I shall tell him that.
Well, he may listen to this. We'll have to see. We'll keep that as a surprise. I think, interestingly, the point at which it really accelerated, I mean, I took on the MD role in January of last year, and for some time I've been located in a different business to Clive. And you'll find I call him Clive when I'm talking in business, and Dad when I'm at home. Strange things in family businesses, hey? But been located in a different building with the design team and marketing team. And in around September this year, he was on annual leave. We'd got a lot to get through the factory. And I moved over and sat in his office to help be closer to the factory and make sure that things were being managed properly. And basically, I didn't move back out. So I ended up with a desk in the corner of that office. And that has been the biggest step that was taken. I wish we'd done it years ago, because all of a sudden you find that every conversation is shared and you're absolutely in lockstep on decisions all the time. It's been fantastic. So
that's quite a powerful learning point, really, either for taking over in your situation, or perhaps it can be read across generally to the benefits of more open plan offices or shared offices, rather than everybody having their own hutch where they're in isolation.
I think so. It wasn't until I made the move that I realised how isolated being in a different building could be. I mean, all it is a short 10-metre walk, but seemingly that does create a barrier, and you end up putting lots of miles on your shoes just to have the same conversations that you might naturally have if you were in the same office.
Well, that could lead on to a whole bigger debate, which is the subject of another podcast, about whether we can be as effective working remotely or whether we need to be in the same.
It's even the geography of an office or the layout of an office and how that all works. It's
There you go. There's another podcast subject for us. What we need is someone who's good at designing working spaces and collaborative spaces, like Dalen.
There's an interesting HBR article about it, actually, around introverts and extroverts and office design and open plan and things like that. So that'd be an interesting one to explore and talk about.
Okay, so you talked about the education sector and the technical furniture. We know, I've been working with the firm and you and your father for a number of years now. It's got one major aspect to this market that you're in, which is it always crops up in our strategic discussions. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we've always been a very seasonal business, or certainly since the early 2000s. And that's because supplying into education, then a lot of the refit work of furniture tends to happen during the holiday periods. And, that makes perfect sense. The students are out, and so that's just the right time to tear everything apart, put it back together again, and be ready for the next semester. That presents quite a lot of challenges in a business that's manufacturing product, especially bespoke product, and we do a lot of customization. And it results in a really strong seasonality where we do something like 50 to 60% of turnover in 4 or 5 months of the year. And so for a long time, it's been a challenge for the business, and something we've been trying to address by looking at how we can level up those quieter periods in the year. So the November to March period, which traditionally has not been so good.
Yeah, and that's where you decide to keep the skills in place, ready for the next summer, but it means you're carrying costs that you don't need at the time through the winter.
Absolutely, and as a business, we could be so much more effective if we were able to carry more skills through and rely less on temporary staffing through the summer. Every summer we go through a cycle of bringing on staff, training them up, bringing them up to a level where they're contributing fully, and just as we get to that point, then the contract terms end and we're scaling back down. And that's obviously not a great way to, or it's not a very efficient way to run the business. You want to be retaining those skills and developing people, so that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, no, I understand. So we had these discussions in a number of strategy meetings before, and just explore different options, really, didn't we?
And I think that conversation's been going on since probably around 2012 onwards, I think. And it's been tickling along for some time. We've had some false starts and some successes as well.
So what sort of things have you looked at?
So in around 2015, I think we launched a brand called Dalen Design Concepts, and that was specifically targeted at the commercial market. So we thought, well, look, we've got these technical products, especially some of the meeting room tables that we do. And I say meeting room tables, typically in a university, they might be a collaborative suite. You might have 10 tables in a room and it's for group working. But that product can be applied to a meeting space, right? So you'd have a screen at the end of the table. You would have connectivity to plug in your own device. We thought, well, there's there's a clear need for that kind of solution in business. So let's take the product but present it differently under a different brand, and try and target commercial customers instead. And we realised that that wouldn't necessarily be counter-seasonal, so it's not going to be just November to March, but it would level up the whole, and perhaps that would allow us to flex by a smaller amount, and help us achieve that more consistent outcome through the year.
And did you find demand was there that you expected? So you said, so we've had a similar thing where with our Magic Minutes product, where we thought, well, everybody has meetings, right? So there's going to be huge demand for this and all of that, like similar over the table. Every business has meetings. Every business needs a collaborative space. Did you find that true when you took the product to market, or?
Yes, although I think there are different ways of achieving it. And so we've got a product that we're very proud of, and that contains all of the equipment in a way that prevents tampering. It doesn't require any mounting on walls. In some spaces you may choose to mount a screen on the wall and have a table in the middle of the room, and broadly speaking it achieves the same thing, but there's some subtlety to what we do that provides a better overall outcome. Now, we did have some success, and we have had some success. At the time, we hived out a separate sales team to solely focus on commercial and gave it a good go. And it kind of, it did okay. It did okay for a while, and still does. We've still got some really reliable customers. There's a large bank that uses our tables and is standardised across all of their rooms. Some other large corporate clients like JLR, Sainsbury's, EDF that we've worked with over a period of time, and yeah, we achieved some of our goals. What we didn't find though was that we were growing it at the rate we wanted to. So we ended up absorbing that sales team back into our existing team, taking the things that we'd learned, but thought, right, if we really want to tackle this problem, we're going to have to find another way to do it, because it wasn't providing the level up that we needed to completely solve that seasonality.
If you look back on that now, do you think you gave up on that too early and it just needed longer, especially when you're comparing a fledgling business unit, if you like, with an established one? Or do you think you made the right call, or even made it late, of deciding to just bring it back into the fold?
I think we made the right call, but if we did it again, we may have made slightly more success of it. And that's just from the learnings of doing it once, and also another brand that we'll get onto, I'm sure.
What was one of the main obstacles then in getting it to grow, that when you reflect on it now, you think, if we'd have perhaps understood that more at the beginning, who the competition was, the pricing levels, the demands, the customer needs, whatever it may have been?
We underestimated the level of competition. Certainly there are a lot of imported products that come in at a lower price, and we've always had a product, or I suppose if we strip it back to us being a manufacturing business operating in the UK, the way in which we add value to our customers is by providing customisation and to some degree bespoke solutions that specifically solve their problems. So rather than having to compromise on a general solution that does 80% and you've got this 20% of frustration, we're able to listen and react. And you can't necessarily do that at low volumes if you're importing. So for us to survive as a UK manufacturer, we need to provide that type of service. And I suppose we looked at the commercial market and thought, well, we can provide this customisation and people will value that, right? And to some degree, some customers did. But what we tended to find was actually presenting that value in a way where it was realised, or I suppose the value only really exists in the mind of the customer, right? So we just found that it didn't necessarily resonate to the level that we expected it to.
Okay, so moved on. Next attempt, you did a bit of product development as well, which is still going now and going very strong, but it didn't solve the strategic challenge. This is where you go into your esports field.
Yeah, that's a more recent development, but certainly in the college space, then in recent times there are MVQs for esports, and those courses require specific spaces to deliver them. So a regular classroom full of IT equipment doesn't really resonate with the students. It's not a space that they want to come in and study in. And so we've developed a range of desks that both presents the gaming computers, which have got RGB lights and are generally quite attractive, but they're also quite desirable bits of kit. So we have to provide security to enclose them at the same time as displaying them. And in general, there's a sort of a look and a feel to esports spaces, and a standard desk doesn't really cut it. So we've developed a product for that, but again, that's in the education market, and it has the same seasonality issues.
Almost making the problem worse by having more demand in the period when you're already busy.
Yeah, I think really in that instance, we're listening to what's happening within that market, and we're developing product to suit the needs of the market. It is providing a bit of growth at the moment, and I think that will continue for a few years. But it isn't a new strand of business. It's just the existing budgets that were being spent on certain types of classrooms are now being spent on esports classrooms, and we have the product depending on which way the customers are going.
Reacted to the demand of the market, as it were.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking to our customers, and we understand what they're trying to achieve and where the education space is going, and we just make sure that we're providing solutions that are relevant.
I'm sure all of our listeners are well up on esports, but it is a booming market, isn't it? It's billions and billions of pounds they reckon are going to be generated in esports, so it's a good thing to be part of.
Personally, I've played games for much of my life. I'm sort of that generation, and certainly within our business initially there was a degree of scepticism around, is this really a course? And actually, the more you get into it, the more you understand that it's capturing students who may otherwise exit education. It's providing, we're here doing a podcast right now. It's providing education around live broadcast. It's, understanding the way in which you set up microphones for streaming and camera setups and things like this. So streaming video games. And similarly for casting, it's from a point of view of it as a live sport that you may watch online, and there's some huge viewerships. Everybody in their life has watched a game of football, right? And you understand that if you were controlling the cameras, you'd be following the ball. And maybe a bit naive, but I think that's fairly simple. And then you watch somebody casting or doing the live production on a video game, and they're having to understand the intricacies of how that game works to know where to focus the camera, where the action is. And it's a niche skill set. And with this boom in live production of video games, some of the competitive nature, some of the competitions, the global competitions and so on, then that skill set is very much in demand. So there is a space for it, and a lot of benefits, although, yes, on the surface you go, gaming, is that really a course?
No, it clearly is, and it strikes me as a very photogenic product as well, that the universities are likely to put that in their brochure, because it's going to attract the generation of people who are looking to go into a university or college education.
They're some of my favourite case studies, to be honest. They look fantastic.
The part, yeah, I would just say all the lighting on them and all of everything else. Okay, so that was just an example of a product development that you're always doing. You're a very high rate of product development type of business, aren't you? But then you led into a new product, but for a different market, now definitely trying to solve this seasonality problem. So tell us about where that went.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've mentioned the education brand of the business. That's called Top Tech. And so on the Top Tech side of the business, we were dealing with an NHS trust who wanted to secure laptops onto medical cards. And this is back in about 2018 now. And so we were engaged with them, and we were designing a solution that would allow them to lock a laptop to a worktop while it was in use. And while we were there, they said, well, we've got this need. We're running an electronic prescribing project. So we need to provide security for the drugs, and we need to provide a location for a computer to be used to help dispense the medication, make sure we've got the right patient, the right drug, the right dose. And this is what's called closed loop administration. They said, well, there's a lot of people out there in the market that do this type of product, but we've looked at them all, and we're after a very specific thing and nobody does it. Can you help? So we went away and we had a look at it and we thought, well, there's some things we could do, and we put together a proposal and we designed a product for them, and they took a good quantity, something like 50 to 100 units. And essentially what they were looking for was a fully height adjustable cabinet. And these are quite common in the market now, which just shows the pace at which things move. But at the time, it wasn't available. And the reason they wanted that is to try and counter the lost time that they were experiencing due to back complaints. So nurses bending down many times a day to pick drugs out of the bottom drawer, or working at a height that is uncomfortable, all of these things that you would deal with through a DSE assessment. They needed something that was fit for purpose, and so that's what we developed. So we went through this process, and it probably took 6 months developing a product for them, going through a few iterations and getting to a point where they were comfortable with it. And out of the back of that, we looked at it and thought, well, this is just one NHS trust, and what is there a need for this elsewhere, and does this help with our seasonality issue? And I suppose, having gone through the Dalen Designs process, we'd spent quite a while thinking about what could solve the seasonality, what types of markets and industries and products could we look at to, or turn our hand to, in order to try and address this seasonality. And so when we started to step back and look at healthcare as a whole, well, there's a seasonality around the end of the NHS financial year, which finishes in March. So that was, a tick straight away.
It's seasonal, but it's a different season. Yeah, okay.
The projects were of a certain scale. There's healthcare isn't going away as a requirement, right?
It's if ones and twos, do you? There's hospitals are big places, and there's lots of them.
No, and that's quite attractive to us. For a long time we've dealt in lower volumes, and we've very much set ourselves up to be able to customise batch by batch. But the idea of being able to produce a higher volume product, but retain some of that customisation, but be comfortable with different size batches and go up to sort of the hundreds plus.
So you're still potentially customising for each individual health trust or whatever that needs it, but then once they've settled on their design, you make out a lot more of that design.
Yes, absolutely. So every trust uses a different software system, or I say every trust uses a different system. There are a few systems out there, but they're all configured slightly differently. And when you actually get under the skin, they might be using this system for what's called order comms, which is like blood sampling and so on. Another system for prescribing, another system for patient records. And sometimes it's all one system, but there's...
For customising to their need, because it'll be different to another trust, and then they'll want lots of them.
And so when you start to get into the detail, they might want to print labels on the cart, they might want to print wristbands, they're likely to want to scan wristbands, possibly the drugs. It depends on exactly how far through the closed loop process they are. And so providing a solution that allows them to do all of that in a way where the printer's not falling on the floor, and it's of the right type, and it's easy to change the paper.
It sounded like the capabilities that you had fitted this need. I'm wondering at what point through the journey did you realise that this was now a strategic shift for the company and the opportunity for it, or whether you were just doing what you've always done of hearing about a customer problem and solving it?
Well, I think that happened after this first project. So for Dalen Designs, I think we moved into it bit by bit, and it was a bit less strategic. But when healthcare came along, then we did step back and do a business plan around, right, if we go after this, what are the products that we're going to need? What is the size and scope of the market? Where do we want to target? We could look at it and say, so the NHS is the obvious one, but you've got private hospitals, you've got care homes. What's the applicability of these products to those different sectors or different institutions?
In terms of your seasonality problem, how far now do you think you are to solving it? Are you there? Have you reached the Shangri-La of seasonality?
Well, it's been quite a journey, and there's been a few false starts even on the healthcare side. Although it is, it's substantially growing at this point in time. I think we are still some way from solving it, and perhaps some of the assumptions we made around healthcare and how it would address seasonality haven't necessarily come to pass, but it certainly helped. So what we have found is that there is a really strong bias towards ordering in the January to March period. So budgets roll around and there is a requirement, if you like, to use those budgets up before they are refreshed in the new year.
The new year being April?
Being April onwards, yeah. But we may be delivering those projects for the next 6 months, because just as we might struggle to make 300 carts in 4 weeks, an NHS trust would struggle to roll out 300 carts in 4 weeks. So
6 months from, say, April, unfortunately, clashes right into the period you're trying to solve.
Yeah, so we're kind of running both strands alongside each other. But it still does level up the whole, and that does allow us to retain more skills. And I'd say it is working. It isn't the panacea, and I don't know whether we need to go into making Christmas stockings next year, but that's it, yeah.
So having reflected now then and looked back on the whole of that experience, because it's been a few years now, hasn't it? And tell me a bit about the Nightingale bit, because that was an interesting sort of side chapter to this whole story as well.
Yeah, we were probably a year into the process, and it was a very interesting time. We obviously all had gone home. We were all working from home on Teams. But being a manufacturing business, then the factory was still operating, so people were coming into work. We got social distancing in place, and we were still producing product out of the factory. And a couple of NHS trusts contacted us, and then some of the resellers, saying, right, we've got this requirement. We're setting up these hospitals. And we were hearing about hospitals that hadn't been announced in the news, and there was this real call to arms almost in terms of, we've got this problem and how can we solve it? So I remember having a call where we're told, right, we've spoken to NHS England and there's a requirement for 2,000 carts and they're needed in 2 weeks. And
this is at the same time that there's manufacturers all over the country trying to come up with ventilators, the whole call to arms, like you say, in the COVID times. So
I suppose a slight sidebar there, in that I'm sat in my home office and I've got my now wife sat next to me, who was working for an aerospace business on a project to develop a ventilator.
You're single-handedly saving the country.
So yeah, we had this call, 2,000 carts needed in 2 weeks, and I'm sat there thinking, well, I don't think we can do that. In fact, fairly sure we can't. And I don't think any of the other competitors can. And we wrote to NHS England to that effect. But at the time, it was so chaotic that trying to find out who was responsible or dealing with this requirement was particularly challenging. But that was week one. About 2 days later, we had a call, and the estimate was 12,000 in 2 weeks.
Up from 2,000.
So, and these carts, the idea was that when they put the Nightingale Hospitals up, you had a bed, you needed a cart with a computer in order to administer the digital chart for the patient in that bed.
So just to remind listeners, this is a few years back now, but they were specially set up hospitals just for patients suffering with COVID. It was an attempt to try and protect the NHS from the overload with this expected influx of thousands of patients.
That's right. And so went up to 12,000, and there was definitely that. I mean, it was a fantastic time in some ways. Obviously, the situation on the ground was not good, but within our business, the way in which we went about things, everybody banded together. I remember having Teams calls till 2 a.m, designing a product overnight to then present the next day, and then pulling together costings, figuring out what we could do it for. And
if only you could recreate that spirit in normal business times, having that same really compelling vision and challenge, and it's just saving lives by doing it.
Such a clear purpose, and everybody was all about it. We were flat out doing everything we could to make it happen. And it was a really interesting opportunity, because essentially it was a no frills product. So if you're selling a cart into the NHS right now, then it needs to be height adjustable. It needs to have containment for the wiring. It needs this. It needs that. This was fixed height, a pole, a base, 4 wheels, and an extension lead to plug everything in. And it
was as basic as you could make it, really, too.
And we needed to make it as basic as possible because we needed it to be manufactured as fast as possible.
So it fit the purpose then. I mean, the whole story sounded like it was going to be a fantastic success, but as we all know from memory, the Nightingale Hospitals didn't really get used, did they? There were too many people with comorbidities and didn't get shifted into them. So how did that affect you then? Did you still get an order for 12,000 trolleys?
Well, we were in dialogue with these resellers who I think were tendering for the work, it turned out, but it was all a bit opaque as to exactly what was going on behind the scenes. And the deadlines weren't moving. And we're looking at it thinking, well, if this is going to happen, then we need to start yesterday. But there's no order yet. And so what do we do? So we rented a industrial unit over the road from us. And we left our existing factory running, doing what it was doing. And actually a friend of mine who runs a outdoor education company, he'd got a bunch of instructors that had been basically they were unable to work because they delivered Duke of Edinburgh courses. He banded together that group. We trained them up on how to assemble this product. We put them into that unit and we started buying components and making them. So we had them in there for a week in the end.
This is all manufacturing at your risk. You hadn't got an order. You were just trying to do the right thing, get some stock put down.
So we banded together, got this started, and in a week they produced 1,000 carts. So, and likewise,
from a standing start, all through the learning curve and everything, yeah.
And we had amazing support as well from some of our supply chain. Supplier of our worktops was prioritising NHS work. Likewise, some of the components we bought in, the casters, things like that, we managed to get in some significant volumes very quickly. And yeah, it was exciting. It was good.
Let's go back to your point about having that very clear and compelling purpose that you've managed to get people in to retrain from what they normally did, whether it be outward bound instructors, you had suppliers. It's if only you could bottle that and recreate it.
Yeah, and I've got some amazing photos of that facility being set up and running and as this is going on. So we were promised an order and it didn't come, but we were like, right, we got to start. And it was like, the order's coming tomorrow. And we were 3 or 4 days in. And at this point, 1,000 carts takes a lot of space, but let's say we've got 600 made. We're looking at it thinking, well, we're going to run out of space in a few days. And so we keep producing, and the orders weren't really coming about. So we ended up pausing it and saying, right, we're just going to slow our horses here and just take stock for a moment. And I'm glad we did, because we did commit an amount of money to doing that. And some of those were sold over a period of time. So individual trusts placed orders for their own expansion or their own Nightingale Hospitals. So a couple of trusts that we were already working with got in touch. They had immediate need and we were able to help them. And we probably sold about 20 to 30% of those carts. So we never did resume manufacture of those. And I think what happened is and I know some of this now, but the forecast dropped right off in terms of how many ventilators and carts were needed. And as that declined, then obviously the urgency decreased, the ability for the existing supply chain and that
purpose went away, didn't it, really?
Yeah, and there were established suppliers out there and they did a great job of supplying. But the first thing you do in a crisis is you pick up the phone the person you know, and
I guess I want to make the point almost in your defence, because there could be people listening thinking, God, that was a bit daft, wasn't it, starting to manufacture without the order? You've got to think back to what we were all thinking back at those early days, mid-2020, when the whole country was on lockdown and we were fearful of hundreds of thousands of people dying. You do stuff, don't you? This isn't about commercial realities then. This is about, I happen to have a manufacturing facility, people's lives depend on it, I'm just going to do do something to help, and that's kind of where you're at.
Absolutely. And it was great to have that purpose. It was a fantastic experience in many ways.
So in a dark time, nevertheless, as you've acknowledged, there was some positives came out of it. Do you think it informed much about your general strategy of getting into healthcare?
I think it made us realise that this will sound quite naive. I think it made us realise how important it was to have those relationships and have that depth of relationship with trusts. And that may sound obvious, but a lot of work in the NHS goes through tenders and is quite formalised, and so there, to some degree, there is definitely a level playing field, but also there is that past history of performance and making sure that you're aware of what's happening and where to go to apply for these tenders and things like this. So I think it opened our eyes to developing, contacts with those customers and prospects. The one thing I would just mention as well, which was probably my favourite outcome of that Nightingale piece, is that despite only selling a couple of hundred, there were a couple of really good things that came out. We ended up donating the remainder of the carts, and they were shipped to Djibouti and used in hospitals over there in Africa. And that was through a charity called Jacob's Well Appeal. And then the second thing was that although there were only a few hundred sold, they went into local trusts, one of which being Coventry and Warwickshire. And so if you look at the photo of the first COVID vaccination that was given in the given worldwide, which was to Margaret Keenan, then our cart is in the background of that shot. So that's one for the history books.
Yeah. In the archives, that'll be there forever. Yeah. Quite an incredible story then.
So from all of these things, we talked about the move into esports and education, the Dalen design concept into commercial, Nightingale, move into healthcare. If someone is kind of listening to this thinking, right, I'm sort of stuck either from the point of view of seasonality, or maybe it's just I've got to think of a new strategic initiative, what would be your kind of pearls of wisdom to them to say, right, this is top 3 things to think of?
Sure. So we've had a couple of false starts with it. I think when we first got into healthcare, then we looked at what we do really well. So this customised aspect, and also the service and support. And we looked at the needs of NHS trusts and thought, well, what does it mean if a cart fails on a ward, right? That's a really bad day, and it shouldn't happen. So reliability is critically important, and service and SLA and things like this. And those things are true, but I think we made some assumptions, and so my first point really would be, don't assume, or if you do make assumptions, you need to keep revisiting them. You need to check that what you assumed is valid and is resonating with your experience with customers. And so in that particular instance, then it wasn't that we were wrong around reliability, but a lot of procurement in the NHS is driven by cost. And when it's not driven by cost, there needs to be a really clear perception of value. And so we went to a conference probably a couple of years ago now on electronic prescribing, and myself and a colleague sat and listened to clinicians talk all day about prescribing errors and patient safety issues that arose from issues with process and issues with the way, it is primarily process, but process systems.
Quite different from the education
and IT. And so all of a sudden we realised that yes, it's about reliability, but really it's about patient safety. Mm-hmm. So once you start to frame the conversation around patient safety, then that perception of value is significantly enhanced.
So what's the takeaway from that then, as Rich says, if someone else is looking to get into a new sector?
What's the research? That's not so much assumptions, isn't it? More do your research and get under the skin of the industry you're trying to get into.
And I think we thought we'd done our research, but actually the more we listened, and I think it's really important you do listen, but the more you listen to experts in the field, then
Because you had done some research.
Oh, absolutely.
Had you spoken more to procurement people than clinicians before then? You hadn't got right to the...
I think I'd phrase it as desk research. We'd done a lot of a bit of Google, a bit of watching a few videos.
So that's the other, get out there and speak to the people, meet them, understand them really well.
Yeah, and it was the less sexy stuff, it's... it may not make a fantastic YouTube video to talk about, and to be fair, probably can't go on something like YouTube to talk about how a spelling error on the name of a drug results in it being in the wrong position on a list, which results in a patient safety issue. But then we started to reflect on that and go, well, okay, so our job really is to provide a solution that that declutters the task at hand, that gives an efficient space to carry out prescribing activities where everything is in the right place. There's really clear focus and no distraction. So, there's lighting so that you can see the name of the drug, for example.
Sounds like you're really focusing on the real customer need now that you understood what it was, whereas before you were focusing on your perceived customer need, and that was a bit of a mental shift.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting learning point. Good.
I think the other thing that that took us probably a little too long to complete was considering what our purpose was. So we initially got into the market looking at healthcare, thinking, okay, so we're going to address our seasonality by operating in this sphere. And we looked, I would say, superficially at what problems it is that we are solving and why we're doing them. And it's easy to say we do it to, improve patient outcomes and things like that. But then at a later point, we spent probably a day's worth of time sat in a room talking about 2 sentences, which were just the purpose of the brand, which is around the digitisation of the NHS and the vision of the NHS becoming paperless and improving patient safety. And so once we had that in place, it becomes more of a cornerstone to the brand and the business.
It's quite important then, was it, that process to go through? Yes,
it was. Once we'd done it, I think we realised how important it was. Right. But before then, we were sort of looking at that we need to do that and we'll get round to it. And then when we did it, we were like, why didn't we do it sooner?
Thing, isn't it? That wordsmith thing to just get clarity of purpose, clarity of thought, make sure they're all aligned.
Did you see any kind of shift in people's thinking around that once you define that a little bit more? Like, we know why we're doing this now, renewed focus, renewed effort, that type of thing.
Absolutely. And we're quite a small team. So for some time we were myself, a designer and somebody in marketing. And then we brought on somebody in sales who's now moved up into a management position, and he's got somebody under him working in sales as well. But actually, as we're bringing people into the team, having all of this so clearly laid out in terms of what we do, how we do it, why we do it, it makes it so much easier to train and onboard people, and make sure that we're all absolutely aligned. We know what we're doing, we know why we're doing it, and every time that sometimes you get questions or you get challenges in business where you can refer back to that and go, no, this is what we do next, and we do that because this is what's important to us.
Well, that's partly what the purpose of these podcasts is for, really, to help share those sort of learning and experiences from one business to another. So thank you very much for sharing all that, Adam, and wish you the best of luck with your continued journey to break into the healthcare market. Already high growth, as you said earlier on, and it's a big market out there, right? So lots to go at. Great, brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, that's another episode of the SME Growth Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And as every week I ask you, please follow us on whichever podcast channel you find us on, or if you want to, go and have a look at the website we've set up specifically for the podcast, SMEGrowthPodcast.com, where you can find all our episodes and transcripts if you need them. So thanks a lot for listening, and tune in next week.